Snow had been falling steadily for 3 days across the Bitterroot Mountains of Idaho, burying Forest Service Road 563 under 4 feet of impassable, suffocating powder. 72-year-old Amelia Sullivan stood by the frosted pane of her remote log cabin, a mug of lukewarm black coffee trembling in her arthritic hands. For 40 years, this cabin had been a sanctuary for Amelia and her husband, Jason. They had carved a life out of the unforgiving wilderness, relying on well water, chopped wood, and each other. But Jason had passed away 6 months ago from a sudden, massive coronary, leaving Amelia in a silence so absolute it physically hurt. Her daughter, Clara Bennett, had pleaded with her from Seattle to move to an assisted living facility, or at least closer to town. Amelia, fueled by the stubbornness that had defined her entire life, absolutely refused. This cabin was Jason. Leaving it meant admitting he was truly gone. But on this particular Tuesday in late January, the isolation was no longer romantic or stoic. It was turning lethal. The ambient temperature outside was hovering around -15 degrees Fahrenheit, not factoring in the brutal wind chill ripping through the pine canopy. Inside, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. The ancient diesel generator, the cabin's only source of power since the main lines had snapped under the weight of the ice storm, had suddenly coughed, sputtered, and died. Amelia watched her breath plume into white clouds in her own living room. She knew the brutal math of survival in the Bitterroots. Without the generator to run the electric space heaters, the cabin would reach freezing temperatures within hours. She had no landline. Her cell phone had lost its signal 2 days prior, and the nearest neighbor, a retired mechanic named Bill Henderson, lived 7 miles down a road that was currently buried under a whiteout. She had to restart that generator. Bundling herself in layers thermal underwear, thick wool sweaters, Jason's oversized insulated Carhartt coveralls, and a heavy parka, Amelia stepped out onto the back porch. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The world was a blinding, swirling vortex of white and gray. She grabbed the snow shovel from the porch railing and began to carve a narrow trench toward the generator shed, located about 50 yards away near the tree line. Every step was agonizing. The snow was heavy and wet, and her joints screamed in protest. Still, she pushed forward. Her mind focused solely on the mechanics of survival. Prime the engine, check the fuel line, pull the cord. She was 10 yards from the shed when tragedy struck with mundane suddenness. Underneath the fresh layer of powder lay a solid sheet of black ice, formed from the melt of a brief sunny spell a week prior. Amelia's heavy bean boot found no purchase. Her feet flew out from under her, and she plummeted backward, the full weight of her body slamming onto the unforgiving ice. A sound like a dry branch snapping violently echoed through the howling wind. The pain was not immediate. First came the shock, a breathless, dizzying confusion. Amelia tried to push herself up, to laugh off her own clumsiness, but as she shifted her weight, an agony so absolute and blinding tore through her right leg that she vomited instantly into the snow. She collapsed back, her chest heaving. She didn't need a medical degree to know what had happened. Her right femur was fractured, completely shattered just above the knee. The unnatural, grotesque angle of her leg confirmed her worst fears. "Help!" she screamed, the word torn away by the wind before it even left her lips. "Somebody! Please!" There was no one, just the howling wind, the towering, indifferent pines, and the rapidly dropping temperature. Amelia tried to drag herself. She dug her heavy mittens into the snow and pulled, but her lower body was dead weight, and any movement sent shockwaves of nausea and blackness through her brain. She managed to crawl perhaps 3 feet before her arms gave out. She was still 40 yards from the back porch. It might as well have been 40 miles. As the afternoon light began to bleed out of the sky, replaced by the bruised purple of an incoming winter night, the brutal reality of her situation settled over her. She was going to die here. The process of freezing to death is deceptively cruel. First comes the shivering, violent and uncontrollable, as the body burns through its energy reserves attempting to generate heat. Amelia's teeth chattered so hard she tasted blood from a bitten lip. The cold seeped through her waterproof layers, finding the sweat she had worked up while shoveling and turning it to ice against her skin. Hours bled into one another. The sky turned pitch black, illuminated only by the faint, eerie glow of the moon reflecting off the snowpack. The wind howled a relentless, mournful dirge. By midnight, the shivering had stopped. Amelia knew enough about hypothermia to recognize this as the beginning of the end. Her core temperature was plummeting. Her body was abandoning her extremities, pulling all remaining warm blood to her heart and brain in a desperate, final stand. Her fingers and toes were completely numb, feeling like heavy blocks of wood. Then came the confusion. The terrifying, beautiful delirium. She stopped feeling the agonizing pain in her shattered leg. Instead, a bizarre sensation of warmth began to wash over her. She felt like she was lying in a hot bath. Her mind urged her to take off her heavy coat, a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, a fatal symptom of late-stage hypothermia. Her fumbling, clumsy hands reached for the zipper of her parka. Jason, she thought, her mind drifting into a hazy, painless fog. I'm coming, Jason. She closed her eyes, ready to surrender to the deep, warm sleep that was calling her name. A sound snapped her eyes open. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, guttural exhalation of breath. Amelia slowly turned her head, fighting the lethargy in her neck muscles. Emerging from the darkness of the tree line, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a shadow. It was massive, easily standing 3 feet at the shoulder, its thick coat a chaotic blend of charcoal, silver, and dirty white. A timber wolf, fear, sharp and primal, pierced through her hypothermic haze. The Bitterroots were home to apex predators, wolves, cougars, bears, but they rarely approached human dwellings. This one, however, was drawn by the scent of helplessness. It was drawn by the scent of her blood where she had bitten her lip, or perhaps just the sheer vulnerability of a dying creature. The wolf took a slow, deliberate step forward. Its yellow eyes, cold and intelligent, locked onto hers. Amelia saw the raw power in its shoulders, the thick, muscular neck, and a jagged, hairless scar that ran down the left side of its muzzle, giving it a menacing, lopsided snarl. So this is how it ends, Amelia thought, a strange detachment washing over her. Not the cold, teeth. She didn't even have the strength to raise her arm in defense. She simply stared into those yellow eyes and waited for the strike. The wolf closed the distance. It stood over her, casting a massive shadow that blocked out the moon. Amelia could smell it, a wild, musky scent of pine needles, wet fur, and raw earth. It lowered its massive head, its jaws opening slightly, revealing teeth that could easily crush a femur. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut, but the bite never came. Instead, she felt a wet, rough tongue drag across her cheek, licking away the frost and dried blood. Amelia gasped, her eyes snapping open. The massive predator was sniffing her face, its breath hot and damp against her freezing skin. Then, with a heavy grunt, the wolf did the unthinkable. It circled her body once, kicking up snow, and then collapsed heavily right beside her. It didn't just lie near her. It pressed its entire 140-pound bulk flush against her side, wedging itself between her shivering torso and the howling wind. It draped its heavy, thickly furred tail over her legs, effectively pinning her down and acting as a living, breathing thermal blanket. Amelia was paralyzed by a mixture of terror and absolute bewilderment. She could feel the immense, radiating heat of the animal seeping through her coat. The beast's heart thumped in a slow, steady rhythm against her ribs. Every time she shifted her weight or whimpered from the phantom pains in her leg, the wolf would raise its scarred head, let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated in Amelia's chest, and press itself tighter against her. As the darkest, coldest hours of the night set in temperatures dropping to -25, Amelia Sullivan lay in the frozen wilderness, kept alive solely by the body heat of an apex predator. The sheer absurdity of the situation kept her mind tethered to reality. She buried her bare, freezing hands deep into the thick, coarse fur of the wolf's neck. The animal didn't flinch. It merely let out a long, slow sigh that plumed into the night air. "Stay," she whispered, her voice barely a rasp. "Please stay." The first rays of dawn broke over the Bitterroot peaks, painting the snow in hues of pale pink and gold. Amelia was barely conscious. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse thread-like. But she was alive. The wolf was still there, completely buried in a drift of snow that had accumulated over them during the night, its body heat creating a small, melted cavern around Amelia. Suddenly, the animal's ears twitched. Its head snapped up, shaking off the snow. It let out a sharp, anxious whine and stood up, pulling the precious heat away from Amelia. "No," Amelia croaked, reaching out a weak hand. "Don't go." But the wolf was looking down the mountain, toward Forest Service Road 563. A faint, mechanical whine was piercing the morning air. The wolf looked down at Amelia one last time. It nudged her cheek with its scarred snout, turned, and bounded effortlessly into the deep snow, vanishing into the dense pine forest just as the sound grew into a roar. 10 minutes later, Deputy Sheriff Tom Higgins, riding a county-issued Polaris snowmobile equipped with a plow track, crested the driveway of the cabin. Behind him, clinging tightly, was Clara, Amelia's daughter. Clara had called the sheriff's department in a panic when her mother hadn't answered the check-in call for 2 days. When Tom Higgins saw the lump in the snow near the shed, his blood ran cold. He leaped off the snowmobile before it even fully stopped, Clara screaming her mother's name. "She's alive," Higgins yelled, pulling his radio from his heavy coat. "Dispatch. I need medevac at the Sullivan property immediately. Severe hypothermia. Compound fracture. Get the chopper in the air now." As Higgins worked frantically to wrap Amelia in thermal shock blankets, he noticed something strange. The snow immediately surrounding Amelia was melted, packed down hard, and filled with massive paw prints. Prints that were entirely too large for any domestic dog. "Deputy," Amelia whispered, her lips blue, her eyes barely open. "The wolf. Don't let them shoot the wolf." Higgins frowned, chalking it up to hypothermic delirium. "Nobody's shooting anything, Mrs. Sullivan. Just hang on." Amelia spent 3 weeks in the intensive care unit at St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula. She lost 2 toes to frostbite and required extensive reconstructive surgery on her femur, but she survived. The doctors called it a medical impossibility. A woman of her age, exposed to those temperatures for over 14 hours, should have been dead before midnight. Clara stayed by her side the entire time. When Amelia was finally moved to a regular recovery room, Clara brought in a cardboard box from the cabin. "I packed up some of Dad's things," Clara said gently, placing the box on the hospital bed. "I thought you might want to look through them while you're stuck here." "I found his old leather journals, the ones he used to write in every morning." Amelia smiled weakly, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover of the topmost journal. Jason had been a meticulous record keeper. He documented weather patterns, wildlife sightings, and the daily chores of mountain life. She opened the journal to a dog-eared page dated nearly 2 years ago. November 14th. Found a male timber off the ridge today. Massive creature, probably pushed out of a pack in the Selway Bitterroot. He was in bad shape. Caught his muzzle in some illegal snare trap down by the creek. Tore himself up pretty good getting free. I managed to throw a tarp over him, pinned him down long enough to bolt-cut the wire. He fought me, nearly took my arm off, left a nasty, jagged cut down the left side of his face. I've been leaving raw venison scraps out by the tree line for the past week. He comes by every night. He's healing, though that scar is going to make him look ugly as sin. I've taken to calling him Ghost. Amelia would kill me if she knew I was feeding a wild apex predator, so I'll keep this between me and the mountain. Amelia's breath hitched. Her hands began to tremble so violently she nearly dropped the book. She turned the page. December dried. "Ghost, let me pet him today." Just for a second. He was eating the scraps, and I sat in the snow about 10 feet away. He walked right up, sniffed my gloved hand, and let me scratch behind his ears. There's an intelligence in this animal I've never seen before. It's like he knows what I did for him. They say wolves are ruthless, but I think they just understand debts differently than we do. We have an understanding, him and I. I look out for him. He leaves the cabin alone. Tears, hot and fast, spilled down Amelia's cheeks, spotting the ink on the page. The animal hadn't been drawn to her vulnerability. It hadn't been a random act of nature. It was an animal that had survived because of the kindness of the man she loved. When Jason had died, the scraps had stopped, but the wolf had never left the territory. When she had fallen, crying out in the snow, Ghost hadn't heard a dying prey. He had heard the mate of the man who saved his life. The mountain had remembered Jason Sullivan, and through the primal, untamed heart of a scarred predator, Jason had reached out from the grave to save her one last time. Amelia closed the journal, pulling it tightly to her chest, the rhythmic thumping of her own heartbeat reminding her of the heavy, steady pulse of the beast in the dark.